This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amraliwala. Our top stories. In the last few minutes, Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has been given a 7-year prison term on corruption charges. At least 280 people are known to have died in Indonesia's tsunami. The country's president has warned people to remain alert with fears of another big wave.
We're still evacuating the dead and taking care of the injured, those who are at health clinics and at hospitals. That's the solution.
And these are the scenes live in Bethlehem. The town is preparing to welcome guests from around the world for Christmas. Hello and welcome to BBC World News, and let's start with that breaking news from Pakistan, because a court in Pakistan has sentenced the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to 7 years in prison on corruption charges. The Accountability Court in Islamabad had indicted Mr Sharif back in August 2017 for holding assets beyond his known sources of income. Mr Sharif's supporters say the case has been politically motivated, but just in the last 5 or 10 minutes that ruling has come from the Anti-Corruption Court and they have given a 7-year sentence. Let's head to Islamabad and Asif Faruqi, who is covering the case for us. And Asif, tell us more.
Nawaz Sharif has, as you said, has been arrested from inside the courtroom after the court found him guilty of owning assets overseas. The anti-corruption body of the country had accused Nawaz Sharif in a court case that he owned property, a steel mill to be precise, in the UAE, which he did not declare in his assets when he submitted those for the election. So the court found the allegations true, and he was given 7 years in prison and $25 million fine. He will be now taken to jail in Rawalpindi, which is like 30 kilometers from here, and he has been acquitted in another case, a similar case that the NAB, National Accountability Bureau, filed against him, which accused him of owning a company based in London. The court said that the prosecution could not prove the case against him, so he has been acquitted in that case, but the other case he has been found guilty.
Tell me and give me an idea of what is happening around the court, because are any of his supporters there for this sentencing?
Yes, from early this morning, hundreds of party workers, his supporters and leaders started gathering outside the court premises. And as soon as he arrived there just an hour ago, they tried to escort him inside the court premises, which obviously police did not allow. And there was a scuffle, and the police had to disperse the crowds, which were in hundreds, and they used tear gas and baton charges. The PMLN party has announced that they will go out in the streets and hold countrywide protest if he is found guilty. So it is yet to be seen whether they are able to muster that kind of a support, party workers all over the country, or it would be just today's affair.
Because Nawaz Sharif, I mean, he only said it again last week, denying not even taking a penny in corruption. That was the quote from him, because his supporters and his team have always said this is politically motivated, haven't they?
Yes, that is precisely the case of Nawaz Sharif, that he says that he is not guilty. But when it comes to court, the judge said today that Nawaz Sharif was not able to produce defense witnesses in this case. So that is something which is being discussed here in the legal quarters as well. When Nawaz Sharif says that he is not guilty, he has not taken a penny into corruption, why was he not able to produce evidence in his support? Then his supporter says that the bar was on the prosecution to prove the case, but then there were also comments from his supporters, his legal advisors, that the court asked him to prove his innocence, which should not have been the case in a criminal case where the burden or the onus of proving the case is on the prosecution.
Asif Faruqi, thanks very much. The latest on that case, as I say, that sentence has just come in the last little while. We have a correspondent inside the courthouse itself, so we hope to return there and bring you the latest on this story here in the next little while. Now to our other main news. Indonesia's disaster agency now says at least 281 people were killed, and officials have warned the actual figure will be higher. A further 57 are missing following the volcanic eruption and subsequent tsunami that swept through Sunda Strait on Saturday. Thousands of people who live on the islands of Java and Sumatra have been forced to evacuate to higher ground. And in the last few hours, there have been further eruptions from the volcano, fueling fears of further tsunamis. The Indonesian president has been visiting one of the affected areas.
Has to be careful and stay alert. We're still evacuating the dead and taking care of the injured, those who are at health clinics and at hospitals. That's the solution.
Well, as we saw, the President has been visiting one of those areas hit the hardest, a beach resort on the island of Java, and our correspondent Rebecca Henschke is also there.
Villas like this one here in Cerita are built right on the ocean, and they didn't stand a chance when the huge waves hit. This, the state of the swimming pool that would have been packed at this time of year with holiday makers for this season. Over here, rescue workers, the military, teams from the National Disaster Agency are clearing up some of the rubble, smashing through the concrete and the metal there to clear it away to begin what will be a slow rebuilding process. Over here you can see the remains of the villa and cars that were parked here at the time smashed together. Heavy building equipment has now arrived in the area to help people with the clearing up. Phone and power lines are being restored today to this area as part of the recovery effort. President Joko Widodo also visiting and promising that this area will be rebuilt. People are being told to stay away from this area if they don't have to be here. But along the coast, people have come back to these ruins of buildings and homes so they can take with them anything of worth that's still in a reasonable condition. Rebecca Henschke, BBC News, Cerita, Banten.
Well, let's get the very latest. Let's speak to Kathy Muller from the International Red Cross. She's in Palu on the central Indonesian island of Sulawesi, where a powerful earthquake struck back in September. Thank you so much for being here with us. Your teams are trying to get to these isolated villages, I think 800 or so people. What is the latest? Because I know they've been on the brink of actually getting there. Are they actually there on the ground there with them?
Yes, so we heard not too long ago that our teams have reached this community of 800 people. We're still not sure if it's an actual community that is stranded or if it's a community plus people who ran for safety when the tsunami was coming in. But regardless, there was this group of people and they were cut off from any kind of support or aid since the tsunami struck. And the Red Cross teams have been able to reach them. They've brought them in the basic things that people would need after being through such a disaster like this. Your tarpaulins, some blankets because it's chilly at night, and clean water so that they have clean water to drink.
From your conversations with your colleagues dealing with all of this in the last 36 hours, how bad is it?
Challenging. There's no doubt about it. We look at the area that is impacted by the tsunami, and it's basically the entire west coast of Java Island. It's a massive swath of land, and it's covered in debris. There are collapsed buildings, collapsed structures, compromised infrastructure. The trees have fallen down. There are cars that are crushed, motorcycles that are just tossed around like kids' toys. There's a lot of debris to clean through. As your reporter mentioned, the big equipment is coming in to some of the areas and starting to clear away that debris. But because the area that is impacted is so wide, it's still going to be a while before every inch of that land is able to be reached.
You spoke a little earlier about getting food and shelter and water to all of those people. We heard from a doctor a little earlier talking about how scared people were of further tsunamis. There's a whole psychological element of help that's also required, isn't there?
Oh, it's so important, of course, to look after people's physical needs, make sure they have clean water and access to health care and a roof over their heads, food to put in their stomachs. But vitally important, and we've seen this in other disasters such as the tsunami and the earthquake here in Sulawesi, is that people are terrified after they go through an event like this, and understandably so. So what the Indonesian Red Cross is doing here in Sulawesi, it will likely become part of the response in Java as well and in Sumatra, is they're providing psychosocial support. So they have trained volunteers who go into the communities, into the affected areas, and with the kids, they're helping them play again. They're getting them to laugh and to draw and to sing and to play, just to be children and to forget about what they've gone through. We find children really respond quite well to that. The adults, it tends to take a little bit longer. Of course, they have the weight of the world on their shoulders, wondering where they're going to live in the future. How are they going to earn an income, all that sort of thing. So we sit with the adults and talk with them and slowly help them work through their emotional pain.
Just a twin final thought, because I know there in Palu you were dealing with the last earthquake, and the region has dealt with 3 major disasters now in as many months. So, I mean, how long is the recovery process? Are the people from September back in homes, or are they still in temporary accommodation and tents? And for the authorities and agencies, how tough is it dealing with multiple disasters?
Oh, well, as the disasters multiply, so do the challenges. We can't blame anybody if they're a little fatigued right now. It is the 3rd major disaster to hit this country since late July. In Palu, we have lots of people, thousands of people who are still living in tented communities. At the Red Cross, our focus now is to try and shift some of those families, at least, back into their own communities where possible and into stronger and safer shelters. The tents are fantastic and provide a vital need in the emergency of a disaster. But now we're 3 months on here, and we need to give people a little bit more privacy. The tents start leaking after a while. And by moving people back into their home communities, it also helps with that recovery process.
Kathy Muller, thanks very much for giving us the latest information there on the ground. Thanks so much for your time. Now, let's turn to some of the day's other main stories. And the US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has been in contact with the chief executives of the country's 6 largest banks. Last week, US stocks had one of their worst falls since the financial crisis of 2008. The talks are part of efforts to calm businesses and investors before trading starts again on Monday. Defence lawyers for 2 Reuters journalists convicted in Myanmar have lodged an appeal with a judge. The reporters, Wah Lone and Ja Sosu, were arrested as they investigated the killing of Rohingya Muslims by the Burmese army. They were jailed for 7 years for breaches of Myanmar's Official Secrets Act. The car maker BMW has been fined $10 million in South Korea and faces a criminal investigation for allegedly trying to hide faulty parts. Investigators found defects in the cars that could cause coolant to leak and set fire to the engine. There have been nearly 40 cases of BMW engine fires in South Korea this year. Now, police in the UK have defended their handling of what appears to have been drones flying over Gatwick Airport last week, which brought the airport to a standstill. It says the information which led to the arrest of 2 people who were later released came from an independent source, and that other lines of inquiry are being pursued. Andy Moore sent us this update from Gatwick, where they say police have found a damaged drone.
The working assumption is that this may well be the drone that was seen by so many people over Gatwick. So there's a forensic examination of that drone. That means checking it for fingerprints or DNA. A parallel digital investigation is any electronic evidence of when and where it was flown. Meanwhile, the couple from Crawley, nearby Crawley, who were arrested, they've been released without charge. Police say they're no longer being treated as suspects. The airport here has been working at full tilt, almost as normal, trying to catch up on that backlog of flights from a couple of days ago. Police say they are interviewing 67 people who said they saw that drone. That includes police officers, ground staff here at Gatwick, members of the public. They say that despite that weight of evidence, they have to keep an open mind. They say there is a possibility, just a possibility, that there may not have been any drones over Gatwick in the first place.
Andy Moore. Now, still to come on the programme.
Some people think, has it happened yet? Good riddance, goodbye.
What do France, Germany and Italy make of Brexit? We ask the European journalists who live in the UK to explain British politics back at home.
The world of music's been paying tribute to George Michael, who's died from suspected heart failure at the age of 53. He sold well over 100 million albums in a career spanning more than 3 decades.
The United States troops have been trying to overthrow the dictatorship of General Manuel Noriega. The Pentagon said that it's failed in its principal objective, to capture Noriega and take him to the United States to face drugs charges.
The hammer and sickle was hastily taken away. In its place, the Russian flag was hoisted over what is now no longer the Soviet Union, but the Commonwealth of Independent States.
Day broke slowly over Lockerbie, over the cockpit of Pan Am's Maid of the Seas, nose down in the soft earth. You could see what happens when a plane 8 stories high, a football pitch wide, falls from 30,000 feet.
Christmas has returned to Albania after a communist ban lasting more than 20 years. Thousands went to midnight mass in the town of Shkodra, where there were anti-communist riots 10 days ago.
This is BBC World News. The latest headlines here. And Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has been given a 7-year prison term on corruption charges. Amid fears that another big wave could hit, rescue workers in Indonesia search for people trapped in the wreckage after a tsunami killed more than 280 people. Now, Christians and tourists from around the world are gathering in the town of Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas. Let's head there and speak to the BBC's Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell, overlooking Major Square there for us. And Yolande, just set the scene for us.
Well, you might be able to hear that there are different groups of Palestinian scouts, brass bands, that are passing through right now. This is part of the Christmas Eve procession. And these young Palestinians will have been practicing for months for this special day. And what they do is they escort the church leaders as they enter into Bethlehem from Jerusalem. This is ahead of midnight mass, but the church leaders will spend the day here. They'll be met by local dignitaries. And all along this route, local people and also visitors from all around the world have turned out to watch the spectacle. And then, of course, some of the lucky few, because it's not that big inside the Nativity Church, will be able to attend midnight mass later. The Palestinian president will be coming later in the day for that as well.
And big numbers there already. It brings to an end a difficult year, though. I mean, you look at something like the peace process and it's in total logjam.
That's right, and here in Bethlehem it's an economy that is reliant on tourism, and it's been hit very badly repeatedly over the years by different flare-ups in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Last year I was here with some local families as they were watching the church leaders arrive. The mood was very different, it was very flat. There had been a lot of unrest because President Trump had just recently announced that he was recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And of course, the Palestinians want East Jerusalem to be the capital of their promised future state. I was just speaking to a Palestinian official here. There's a lot of trepidation about what the year ahead might involve. Relations with the US and Palestinian leaders remain at an all-time low. The Trump administration says that it wants to publish its plan to try to get talks going again between Israel and the Palestinians, but expectations about that are very negative indeed. Palestinian leaders say that they reject what is announced.
Yolande Nell there in Bethlehem. Thanks very much. Thank you. Now here, Queen Elizabeth will urge people to treat each other with respect in her annual Christmas message to be broadcast on Tuesday. Buckingham Palace has released some excerpts with the Queen saying that the message of peace on earth and goodwill to all is never out of date. More now from our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
Throughout her reign, the Queen has always been notably cautious whenever it's come to making a comment which could be construed as an observation about the political debate. But with the nation divided over Brexit, it would be strange if the head of state, in her one personal message of the year, did not make some attempt to address people's concerns. Her Christmas message was recorded earlier this month at Buckingham Palace, when the Brexit debate in Parliament was at its height. In the broadcast, she will say this: "Even with the most deeply held differences, treating the other person with respect and as a fellow human being is always a good first step towards greater understanding." The context of those remarks isn't clear from what Buckingham Palace has released. It may be doubted whether the Queen has said anything explicit about Brexit, but it's clear that the Palace is hoping these few words and a reference to the need for the Christmas spirit of goodwill to be heeded will be construed as an attempt by the monarch to soothe the Brexit debate. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, Nick, there talking about Brexit. 2019 promises to be another rollercoaster year for Brexit. The UK's departure from the European Union has divided opinion in Britain to the point where, as we heard, the Queen feeling it necessary to ask for tolerance and understanding. MPs within the governing Tory party, as well as the opposition Labour, can't agree on a political way forward. But what do they think of it elsewhere? Well, we talked to foreign correspondents reporting on Brexit. Have a listen.
If Dante's Inferno was written again for today's audience, Dante would put Great Britain in a hell in which the country has to repeat debating Brexit forever.
There was a lot of shock and surprise to leave the European Union, but I think there was also a sort of assumption that Britain, as a very sophisticated, smart country, would navigate its way through this.
Some people think, has it happened yet? Good riddance, goodbye. Another stream is skepticism. They're never going to do it.
Real sadness. I think, of course, yeah, impatience and bemusement, and why is that all going on? Everybody loves Britain, they love Scotland, they love London, they love Cornwall, they see all these films about Cornwall, and Harry Potter and Cambridge and Oxford.
There's some who welcomes Brexit and think that actually that UK should join the EEA, and that is great news. Like now we get a new member to our club and that will make us kind of stronger together. Some Norwegians will be scared that Norway would lose their voice within the EEA because UK is a bigger country.
There was a trio of big nations in Europe, Britain, France and Germany. Now it's left to France and Germany. France and Britain are the closest military and security partners. It will continue after Brexit.
I mean, so many Germans watch actually Prime Minister's question, and they find it fantastic how they are shouting at each other, but in this such a educated, sophisticated way. That's why I think there is bemusement or even irritation about the fact that this very parliament is suddenly falling apart.
Nigel Farage obviously has some recognition because of his role in the Trump campaign, because he does some broadcasting in the US. Boris Johnson, I think, did establish some profile.
People are really aghast at what is happening here in the political circle and fighting like school children.
Italian politics is so chaotic. When they look at Brexit debates in Parliament, they don't consider it particularly, scary or crazy.
There's been a lot of talk about Ireland getting above its station. There's a sense sometimes amongst Irish people that maybe British politicians who say those kind of things simply don't understand Ireland.
I'm ready to bet nobody in Italy knows what the backstop is. They will probably say, I think it's a baseball position or maybe a new tactic that you play in football.
People don't know how likely that hard border is. You have to remember, this isn't just a practical thing, this is also a very emotive thing for people. There are generations on both sides of that border who have been scarred by the events that have happened within the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Americans instinctively like the UK and they would like to have a close relationship.
Italians have such a love story with Britain. They want to be able to come to this country to visit as tourists. They want to study. The UK universities are full of Italian students. This love story will not end, of course, with Brexit. No matter what happens, Britain is part of Europe.
Well, just the view from foreign correspondents. Let's return to that breaking news from Pakistan in the last 30 to 40 minutes. A court there has sentenced the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to 7 years in prison on corruption charges. The Accountability Court in Islamabad had indicted Mr Sharif back in August 2017. You remember, after the release of the Panama Papers, for holding assets beyond his known sources of income. Mr Sharif's supporters have always said the case is politically motivated. Now, in court just now, he's been sentenced to 7 years for the case that has been commonly known as the Al Aziza Steel Mills case. There were other cases. He was acquitted, though, of the flagship investments side of it. But those are the latest details coming from the courthouse. We have a correspondent inside the court. We'll talk to them in half an hour's time. Hopefully, I'll see you then. Bye for now.